Change your mindset, change the game. The migraine hit me like a freight train during the most important presentation of my career, and as I stood there in the boardroom gripping the podium while my vision blurred, I realized that my mind, the thing I'd always trusted most, had become my biggest enemy. I'm Betty Harrison, and until that moment, I'd built my entire identity around being the person who could think her way through anything. Growing up in a middle-class family in Seattle, I'd been the daughter who got straight A's through sheer mental determination, the one who earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, the marketing strategist who could analyze any problem and find the solution. But here's the paradox that would shatter everything I believed about success: the harder I thought, the worse everything got. "Betty, are you all right?" My boss's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater as I stared at the PowerPoint slide that now looked like abstract art through my migraine-addled vision. "I'm fine," I lied, though fine was the last thing I was. This was my third migraine this week, my fifth panic attack this month, and my blood pressure, which my doctor had been monitoring with increasing concern, was climbing toward dangerous territory. The presentation I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting suddenly felt impossible to deliver. The slides I'd memorized word for word swam before my eyes like alphabet soup. My body, which had always been the reliable vehicle for my ambitious mind, was staging a full-scale rebellion. "Maybe we should reschedule," suggested Jennifer from HR, her voice carrying that careful tone people use when they're watching someone fall apart in real time. As I stumbled out of the conference room, my mind raced with questions that terrified me. Why was my body failing me when I needed it most? Why did stress, which had always motivated me to perform better, now seem to be literally killing me? And most frightening of all, if I couldn't trust my mind and body to work together, who was I? The drive home was a blur of pain medication and self-recrimination. I'd always prided myself on being someone who thrived under pressure, who turned stress into success, who could think her way out of any challenge. My parents had raised me to believe that intelligence and determination could overcome anything, and for 28 years, that formula had worked. Until it didn't. That evening, I sat in my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, surrounded by the markers of my supposed success: my Northwestern diploma, awards from previous campaigns, a bookshelf full of business and psychology texts, and faced a truth that felt like betrayal. Everything I'd been taught about how to succeed was slowly destroying me. The irony was crushing. I was a marketing strategist who understood the power of perception and messaging, yet I'd never considered that the messages I was telling myself about stress, pressure, and achievement might be the very thing making me sick. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How did the presentation go, honey? I know you'll knock their socks off like always." I stared at the message, unable to respond. How do you tell your parents, who sacrificed so much to give you opportunities they never had, that their investment in your education and ambition has led you to a place where your own mind feels like a prison? But as I sat there in the dark, nursing my third migraine of the week with ice packs and prescription painkillers, something my college psychology professor had said echoed in my memory: the mind is not just housed in the brain, it's distributed throughout the entire body, and the story you tell yourself about your experience literally changes your physiology. At the time, I dismissed it as new age nonsense. Now, with my head pounding and my career hanging in the balance, I wondered if there was something I'd missed. Something fundamental about how the mind and body actually work together. That could explain why all my intelligence and effort were backfiring so spectacularly. The question that would consume me for the next 6 months was this: what if the problem wasn't that I was thinking too hard, but that I was thinking wrong? And if that was true, could changing how I thought actually change everything? I had no idea that the answer would come from a psychologist in Texas who would introduce me to research so revolutionary that it would force me to question everything I believed about the relationship between mind and body, expectation and reality, belief and biological response. But first, I had to discover just how deep the rabbit hole of my own limiting beliefs actually went. The weeks following my boardroom breakdown became a masterclass in how good intentions and intelligent analysis can make a bad situation catastrophically worse. I threw myself into what I called Operation Mind Fix, a systematic attempt to think my way out of the problem of thinking too much. First came the productivity optimization phase. I downloaded apps to track my stress levels, optimize my sleep cycles, and monitor my brain waves. I bought expensive supplements that promised to enhance cognitive function and reduce cortisol. I restructured my entire day around peak performance schedules I'd read about in business magazines. "You're treating yourself like a machine that needs debugging," my roommate Sarah observed one morning, finding me surrounded by charts, graphs, and biometric data that looked like mission control for my own consciousness. "There has to be a pattern," I insisted, pointing to my stress tracking spreadsheet. "If I can just identify the triggers and optimize the variables, I can solve this." But the harder I tried to engineer a solution, the worse my symptoms became. My migraines increased in frequency and intensity. My sleep became more fractured as I obsessed over optimizing it. My blood pressure readings, which I was now taking 3 times daily, continued their alarming upward climb. The medical phase was equally frustrating. I saw specialists who ran every test imaginable, prescribed medications that either didn't work or created new problems, and offered suggestions that felt like band-aids on a broken dam. The neurologist suggested I had tension headaches from stress. The cardiologist said my blood pressure spikes were anxiety-related. The psychiatrist recommended therapy for perfectionism and burnout. "Everything looks normal on paper," became the refrain that haunted my medical appointments. "Your labs are fine, your scans are clear, but you're obviously experiencing real symptoms." Real symptoms with no apparent cause. A body in rebellion against a mind that was trying desperately to fix it through analysis and control. The worst part was how my professional life began to unravel. The presentation I'd bombed was just the beginning. Projects that should have been simple became overwhelming. My legendary attention to detail transformed into paralyzing perfectionism. Colleagues started handling me with kid gloves, and I could see them exchanging concerned glances when they thought I wasn't looking. "Betty, maybe you should take some time off," my boss suggested during a review meeting where I'd had to excuse myself twice due to sudden dizzy spells. "You've been pushing yourself pretty hard lately." Time off felt like failure. I was supposed to be the person who thrived under pressure, who turned challenges into opportunities. Taking time off was admitting that my most fundamental beliefs about myself were wrong. But the breaking point came during what should have been a routine grocery shopping trip. Standing in the cereal aisle at Whole Foods, I suddenly felt my heart racing, my vision tunneling, and my breath becoming shallow and rapid. The fluorescent lights seemed to strobe, the background music became overwhelming, and I had to grip my cart to keep from falling. A panic attack. In the cereal aisle. Over nothing. A kind stranger helped me to the customer service counter, where I sat breathing into a paper bag while the manager asked if I needed an ambulance. The humiliation was almost worse than the physical symptoms. Here I was, a successful professional who prided herself on competence and control, having a breakdown because Cheerios felt like too many choices. "Happens more than you'd think," the manager said kindly. "Lot of people been having anxiety lately. Must be something in the air." Something in the air. As if anxiety was weather, something that happened to people rather than something people created through their own thoughts and responses. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I Googled mind-body connection with genuine desperation rather than academic curiosity. What I found was a rabbit hole of research I'd somehow missed despite my psychology background, studies showing that beliefs, expectations, and mindsets didn't just influence how we felt about our experiences, but actually changed our biological responses to them. One study in particular caught my attention, research from Stanford showing that people's beliefs about whether stress was harmful or helpful determined whether stress actually harmed or helped them. The same stressor, the same physiological response, but completely different health outcomes based on what people believed about stress itself. "That's impossible," I said out loud to my empty apartment. "Belief can't change biology." But even as I said it, I remembered the placebo effect research I'd studied in college, how fake treatments could produce real healing when patients expected them to work. I'd always dismissed the placebo effect as something that happened to other people, less educated people, more suggestible people. What if I'd been wrong about that too? Sitting there at 2 a.m., surrounded by research papers and medical journals, I finally admitted something I'd been avoiding: my intelligence. The thing I'd always seen as my greatest asset had become a trap. I was so good at analyzing problems that I'd turned my own mind and body into a problem to be solved rather than a system to be understood. But the question remained: if thinking differently could actually change how my body responded to stress, how exactly was I supposed to change the way I thought? And more importantly, was it already too late to undo the damage I'd done to myself through months of well-intentioned but misguided self-optimization? I had no idea that the answer would come from a chance encounter with a psychologist who specialized in exactly what I'd been struggling with, and who would introduce me to research so compelling that it would literally change how I understood the relationship between mind and body. The workshop was called Mind-Body Integration in Professional Settings, and I'd only signed up because my insurance would cover it as stress management training. I expected another round of generic relaxation techniques and breathing exercises that would make me feel briefly better before reality crashed back in. Instead, I met Dr. Walker Teddy, a psychologist from Austin who would completely revolutionize how I understood the relationship between belief and biology. Walker was nothing like the clinical professionals I'd been seeing. Probably in his mid-40s, with an easy Texas drawl and the kind of presence that made you feel heard before you'd even spoken, he had a way of explaining complex research that made it feel like conversation rather than lecture. "How many of you," he began, addressing our group of about 20 stressed-out professionals, "have been told that stress is bad for your health?" Every hand in the room went up, including mine. "And how many of you believe that to be true?" Same hand stayed up. "Well," Walker said with a smile that suggested we were in for a surprise, "what if I told you that belief itself might be what's making stress harmful? That the same physiological stress response can either enhance your performance and health, or damage it, depending entirely on what you believe about stress." I felt my skeptical mind engage immediately. "That sounds like magical thinking," I said, surprising myself by speaking up. "I love skeptics," Walker replied, his eyes lighting up. "They make the best students because they demand evidence. Let me share some research that might interest you." He pulled up a slide showing data from a study I'd never heard of. Dr. Alia Crum and her colleagues at Stanford followed 30,000 people for 8 years. They found that people who believed stress was harmful had a 43% increased risk of premature death. But here's the fascinating part: people who experienced high levels of stress but didn't believe it was harmful? They had the lowest death rate in the entire study. "How is that possible?" asked a woman sitting near me. "Because," Walker explained, "what we call stress is actually your body mobilizing resources to help you meet challenges. Increased heart rate pumps more blood to your brain and muscles. Stress hormones heighten focus and attention. These are enhancement responses, but only if you interpret them that way." During the break, I approached Walker with my skepticism intact. "This sounds like you're saying we can just think our way to better health. That seems oversimplified." "Actually," he said, "I'm saying something much more radical than that. I'm saying that the distinction between mind and body is largely artificial, and that beliefs have measurable, immediate biological effects." He mentioned research I'd never encountered: Dr. Fabrizio Benedetti's work in Italy showing that morphine was significantly more effective when patients knew they were receiving it versus when they received the same dose through automated 4 pumps without awareness. "The placebo effect," Walker continued, "isn't about fake pills or suggestible patients. It's a demonstration of how expectation literally recruits healing properties in the body. Your beliefs are biological facts, not just psychological preferences." "But I'm not talking about placebo pills," I protested. "I have real symptoms: migraines, high blood pressure, panic attacks." "And I'm not suggesting your symptoms aren't real," Walker replied gently. "I'm suggesting that the story you're telling yourself about those symptoms might be amplifying them in ways you haven't considered." He shared another study that made my head spin: research where hotel housekeepers were told their work qualified as exercise and satisfied the Surgeon General's fitness recommendations. Without changing their behavior at all, these women lost weight, reduced blood pressure, and decreased body fat, simply from reframing their daily work as beneficial exercise rather than drudgery. The same activity, the same energy expenditure, Walker explained, but completely different biological outcomes based on mindset. That's impossible, I said, though with less conviction than before. Is it? Tell me about your experience with stress. Do you see it as your body preparing you to perform, or as your body breaking down under pressure? The question hit me like a physical blow because I immediately knew the answer. Every racing heartbeat, every surge of adrenaline, every tightening muscle had been interpreted by my mind as evidence that I was failing, that my body was betraying me, that I was fundamentally not equipped to handle the demands of my life. I see stress as my body failing me, I admitted. And how has that interpretation worked out for you? Not well, I said, thinking about my escalating symptoms and declining performance. Walker nodded. What if I told you that research from Harvard shows people who view stress as enhancing rather than debilitating perform better, recover faster, and have measurably different cardiovascular responses to the same stressors? He mentioned Dr. Jeremy Jameson's work, showing that people who were taught to reinterpret their stress arousal as excitement rather than anxiety performed significantly better on public speaking tasks and showed healthier physiological responses. The arousal is the same, Walker explained. Increased heart rate, heightened alertness, mobilized energy. But labeling it as excitement versus anxiety creates completely different experiences and outcomes. As the workshop continued, Walker introduced research that systematically dismantled everything I thought I knew about the mind-body relationship. Studies showing that beliefs about aging affected actual longevity. Research demonstrating that mindsets about intelligence determined academic performance. Evidence that even metabolic responses to food were influenced by expectations about nutrition. Your mind, Walker said during our final session, isn't separate from your body giving it commands. Your mind is a biological process distributed throughout your entire system, and every thought, belief, and expectation you have creates immediate changes in your physiology. After the workshop, I approached Walker with a question that felt vulnerable to ask. If what you're saying is true, how do I change beliefs that feel like facts? My stress really does feel dangerous and overwhelming. That, Walker said, is exactly the right question. And the answer isn't about positive thinking or pretending everything is fine. It's about learning to work with your body's wisdom rather than against it. He handed me his card. Betty, would you be interested in exploring what it looks like to change your relationship with your own physiology? Because based on what you've shared, I think you might be surprised by what becomes possible when you stop fighting your body and start partnering with it. Driving home from the workshop, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, curiosity instead of dread about my own internal experience. For the first time, I began to wonder if my symptoms weren't evidence of weakness or failure, but information about how my beliefs were literally shaping my biology. The question was no longer how to fix my broken mind and body. It was how to discover what became possible when I stopped treating them as separate entities that needed to be controlled, and started understanding them as an integrated system that responded to belief as powerfully as it responded to medicine. Walker's approach to mindset transformation was unlike anything I'd encountered in therapy or self-help books. Instead of trying to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, he taught me to understand the biological purpose of every response my body was having, and then consciously choose how to interpret those responses. The first step, he explained during our initial one-on-one session, isn't to stop having stress responses. It's to understand what those responses are actually designed to do. He had me start keeping what he called a physiology journal, tracking not just my symptoms, but my interpretations of those symptoms and the stories I told myself about what they meant. When your heart rate increases before a presentation, Walker asked, what story do you tell yourself? That I'm panicking. That my body is betraying me. That I'm not cut out for high-pressure situations. And what if I told you that research from Harvard shows that increased heart rate before performance is your cardiovascular system optimizing blood flow to your brain and muscles? That it's literally your body preparing you to perform at your best. The reframe felt revolutionary and ridiculous at the same time. But it doesn't feel like optimization. It feels like terror. Because you've been interpreting preparation as panic, Walker explained. Let's try an experiment. He had me practice a technique developed by researchers at the University of Rochester, when I felt my heart racing before a challenge. Instead of thinking I'm anxious, I would think I'm excited. My body is getting ready to help me succeed. Same physiological arousal, Walker explained, but channeled toward enhancement rather than against it. The first few times I tried this, it felt absurd. My racing heart still felt like panic, no matter what I told myself. But Walker had warned me about this resistance. Your neural pathways have been practicing the stress is dangerous interpretation for years, he said. It's going to take consistent practice to create new pathways that interpret arousal as preparation rather than threat. The breakthrough came during a client presentation 3 weeks into practicing the reframe. As I felt my heart rate increase and my breathing become more rapid, instead of fighting these sensations or interpreting them as evidence of impending failure, I said to myself, my body is preparing me to be brilliant. This energy is exactly what I need to connect with my audience. Something shifted immediately. The same physiological sensations that had previously sent me into panic spirals suddenly felt like fuel. My thinking became clearer, my voice stronger, my presence more confident. I delivered what was probably the best presentation of my career. What changed? Walker asked when I described the experience. Nothing and everything, I said. My body did exactly the same things it always does before presentations, but instead of working against those responses, I worked with them. Walker smiled. You just experienced what Dr. Alia Crum calls stress inoculation. You didn't eliminate stress, you transformed your relationship with it. But the real transformation came when Walker introduced me to research that completely revolutionized how I understood the placebo effect. He shared Dr. Benedetti's work showing that morphine was more effective when patients knew they were receiving it, and then connected it to my own experience. Every time you take medication for your migraines, Walker asked, what do you expect to happen? I hope it works, but honestly, I expect it probably won't. Most things haven't helped much. So you're taking medication while simultaneously believing it won't be effective? When he put it that way, I realized I'd been unconsciously sabotaging every treatment I tried by expecting it to fail. Walker introduced me to research from Harvard's program in placebo studies showing that even when people know they're taking a placebo, it can still be effective if they understand how the placebo effect works. It's not about fake pills, Walker explained. It's about harnessing your body's natural healing mechanisms through expectation and belief. We started treating my migraine medication differently. Instead of taking pills while bracing for disappointment, I began taking them while consciously expecting and visualizing relief. I started telling myself that my body knew how to heal, and that the medication was supporting processes that were already working in my favor. The results were immediate and dramatic. The same medications that had provided minimal relief when I took them skeptically became significantly more effective when I took them with genuine expectation of benefit. This feels like cheating, I told Walker after a particularly bad headache resolved much faster than usual. You're not cheating, he replied. You're finally working with your biology instead of against it. The most profound shift came when Walker introduced me to research about stress and performance from Dr. Jeremy Jameson at the University of Rochester. The studies showed that people who were taught to view their stress arousal as helpful rather than harmful performed better on everything from academic tests to public speaking. Your stress response, Walker explained, is designed to enhance performance. Increased heart rate pumps more oxygenated blood to your brain. Stress hormones heighten focus and attention. Muscle tension prepares you for action. The question is whether you interpret these changes as your body preparing you to succeed or warning you that you're about to fail. Over the following weeks, I began applying this reframe to every aspect of my life. Instead of seeing my perfectionism as a character flaw, I started viewing it as evidence of high standards and attention to detail. Instead of interpreting my intense focus as obsessiveness, I began recognizing it as a strength that allowed me to produce exceptional work. The resistance came from everywhere, years of conditioning, well-meaning friends who worried I was pushing too hard, and my own deep-seated beliefs about what it meant to be healthy and balanced. But Walker helped me understand that changing mindsets wasn't about becoming someone different. It was about becoming more authentically myself. You're not trying to eliminate your intensity or your drive, he explained. You're learning to channel those qualities in ways that enhance rather than exhaust you. 6 weeks into working with Walker, I realized something profound had shifted. I was handling the same workload, the same pressures, the same challenges that had previously overwhelmed me, but my body was responding completely differently. My migraines had decreased in both frequency and intensity. My blood pressure readings were consistently lower. My sleep was deeper and more restorative. Most importantly, I was enjoying my work again. The challenges that had felt overwhelming now felt energizing. The pressure that had seemed threatening now felt like fuel for excellence. The work didn't change, I told Walker. But somehow everything else did. The work was never the problem, he replied. The problem was the story you were telling yourself about the work, about stress, about what your body's responses meant. Change the story, and you literally change the game. 8 months after my boardroom breakdown, I'm standing in front of a packed auditorium at a marketing conference, delivering a keynote about the neuroscience of peak performance under pressure. My heart is racing, my breathing is elevated, and my muscles are energized, and for the first time in my career, I'm interpreting these sensations exactly as they're meant to be interpreted, as my body preparing me to be extraordinary. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't about positive thinking or pretending stress didn't exist. It was about fundamentally changing my relationship with my own physiology, learning to work with my body's wisdom rather than against it. How many of you, I ask the audience, have been told that stress is the enemy of performance? Nearly every hand goes up, just as mine had in Walker's workshop months earlier. What if I told you that research from Stanford, Harvard, and the University of Rochester shows that stress can actually enhance performance, health, and well-being, but only if you believe it can? I share the studies that changed my life, Dr. Alia Crumb's research on stress mindsets, Dr. Benedetti's work on expectation and healing, the hotel housekeepers study that proved beliefs about exercise could change actual fitness outcomes. But more importantly, I share my own journey from someone who was literally being destroyed by stress to someone who learned to transform stress into fuel. The most powerful part of my presentation isn't the research, it's the demonstration. I show the audience my blood pressure readings from 8 months ago versus now, my migraine frequency charts, my productivity metrics. Same job, same responsibilities, completely different biological responses. The question isn't whether you experience stress, I tell them. The question is whether you interpret that stress as your body preparing you to succeed or warning you that you're about to fail. After the presentation, a young marketing manager approaches me with tears in her eyes. I've been having panic attacks before every client meeting, she says. I thought there was something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you, I tell her. Your body is doing exactly what it's designed to do, mobilizing energy to help you perform. You just need to learn a different story about what those sensations mean. This conversation has become routine. Since I started speaking about mindset and physiology, I've heard from hundreds of professionals who recognized their own story in mine, intelligent, driven people who were being undermined by their own beliefs about stress, performance, and what it means to be healthy under pressure. The ripple effects of my transformation extended far beyond my career. My relationship with my parents deepened when I stopped seeing their concern about my stress as judgment and started appreciating it as love. My friendship with Sarah evolved when I stopped needing her to validate my struggles and started sharing my discoveries about resilience and growth. Most importantly, I've become a completely different kind of professional. Instead of trying to eliminate challenges and pressure from my work, I actively seek out projects that will stretch me, knowing that my body's stress response is actually preparing me to rise to those challenges. You know what's interesting? Walker said during one of our recent check-ins. You're probably experiencing more objective stress now than you were 8 months ago, bigger projects, higher stakes, more responsibility. But your subjective experience of that stress has completely transformed. He was right. My current workload would have hospitalized the version of me that had that breakdown in the boardroom. But now, instead of interpreting pressure as threat, I understand it as information about what matters to me. Instead of seeing stress arousal as malfunction, I recognize it as my body's way of preparing me for excellence. The research that once seemed too good to be true now feels like fundamental truth. Our mindsets aren't just psychological preferences, they're biological realities that shape every aspect of our health and performance. This morning, I got an email from a woman who'd watched my TED Talk online. She wrote, "I used to think my anxiety was proof that I wasn't cut out for leadership. Now I realize it's proof that I care deeply about doing good work. That one shift has changed everything for me." That's exactly what Walker taught me to understand. The same physiological responses that can destroy us when we interpret them as threats can enhance us when we interpret them as preparation. The same stress that sends some people to the hospital can send others to new heights of performance and fulfillment. The most profound lesson isn't that we can think our way to perfect health and effortless success. It's that we can learn to work with our biology rather than against it, to partner with our stress responses rather than be victimized by them, to understand that our bodies are sophisticated systems designed to help us thrive under pressure, if we believe they are. For anyone reading this who feels betrayed by their own stress responses, who's been told that anxiety and pressure are obstacles to overcome, I want you to know, your body isn't failing you. Your body is trying to help you succeed in ways you may not have learned to recognize yet. The crisis that felt like it would end my career became the beginning of understanding how powerful the mind-body connection really is. And that understanding has become the foundation for a life that's more challenging, more pressured, and more stressful than ever before, and also more fulfilling, more energizing, and more authentically successful than I ever imagined possible. Change your mindset, and you literally change the game. Not because thinking differently eliminates challenges, but because it transforms those challenges from obstacles into opportunities, from threats into fuel, from evidence of inadequacy into proof of your body's wisdom and your capacity to thrive. The game was never about avoiding stress. The game was about learning to dance with it. And once you know the steps, the music becomes beautiful.